Oh, I told the band I might have a Holy Ghost moment during that song. There's something about that. As you know, the changes are afoot here at Unity, and a little daunted by what's before me. I told Cynthia James is one of my prayer partners, and I told her, she said, "How are you feeling?" And I said, "I'm a little scared." And she said, "Good." She said, "If the vision doesn't scare you, it's not big enough." So I know that with you behind me and around me, we're going to do this thing together. It's going to be great. So it's going to be great. So, I have a new app, and I'm just going to go back to the old one. I don't like it as well. Anyway. Ron Chester, 89 years of age, was stopped by the police around 2 a.m., and he was asked where he was going at that time of night. And he replied, "I'm on my way to a lecture about alcohol abuse and the effects it has on the human body, as well as smoking and staying out late." And the officer said, "Really? Who on earth is giving that lecture at this time of night?" And Ron replied, "That would be my wife." I love that. So we're talking about projection. The idea of projection is that, well, here's the way we say it in 12 steps. You spot it? Yeah, you got it. That sometimes there are things that are unhealed in our own nature, in our own being, in our psyche, in our heart. It's just, there's nothing wrong with you. That's what we teach in Unity. You are the wholeness of God personified, but we don't always know it, and we don't always act as if that's what we were. And so there are times when we see something out in the world, and it really bothers us, and it's not actually happening out in the world. The trouble is here. So I want to give you a little bit of the psychological jargon. Just this is the definition of what this thing is called psychological projection. It's a theory in psychology in which humans defend themselves against their own unconscious impulses or qualities by denying their existence in themselves while attributing it to others. For example, a person who is habitually rude may constantly accuse other people of being rude. I know that person. Because I am that person. Do you get it? Those parts of me that I am, if we're seeing it out there, it's disowned in me, and so I can't even abide it, so I'm going to keep finding it. And it bugs me. So Carl Jung did a lot of work on this, and he talked about the golden shadow and the dark shadow. The dark shadow would be those qualities of ourselves that we're not comfortable with, and we can't own them. And so somebody described it as putting rocks in a sack and putting it in our back. It's causing things to happen, but we're not really aware of it. We're not really sure what's going on. And then the way we can begin to become aware is that we're seeing it out there. He also talked about the golden shadow. Those are the noble parts of ourselves that we have also disowned. And so sometimes we'll see somebody we really admire, and we think, "Oh, that's nothing like me." Yes, it is like you. You're projecting something that is maybe not fully developed, but it's in you, or you wouldn't see it out there. Marie-Louise von Franz, she extended her own view of projection. She said this, I love this: "Wherever known reality stops, where we touch the unknown, there we project an archetypal image." When we get to the point where we actually don't know what's going on, we make it up. More on that in a moment. So that's what psychologists have when they're using with this idea of projection. That's what they're talking about. But this is actually, we are well informed by psychology and Unity. We are not a religion that tells you not to go to therapy. As a matter of fact, I recommend it highly. When people come for me for spiritual counseling, I say, I'm not a therapist. I have a therapist. I'm not one. And she's on call, a speed dial if I need her. But what we understand is we're not one of those churches that ask you to check your brain at the door. That we welcome the discoveries of science. We welcome the discoveries of psychology because we understand that it's all God. And in some, particularly the religion I grew up in, those discoveries were threatening to the faith system. That you were given a creed. Anybody else creed people here? Any other creed people? That you remember the Nicene, the Apostles' Creed? And if you couldn't let anything else that would kind of maybe get in the way or disagree with that, it was bad. The preacher, don't look at that. The priest would be, don't look at that. And we're not like that in unity. Instead, we're like, test it. This is a principle. It's timeless. A friend of mine, her guru, she was in the Hindu tradition, he said, kick it. If it stays down, it wasn't the truth to begin with. Test it. So anyway, but what we understand is that this principle that psychologists call projection is spiritual in nature as well. Not just mental, not just emotional, but spiritual. And Jesus, the master teacher, our exemplar, the one that we look to see how to live, when Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, what we understand that to be is like, he's like, the way I'm doing it, that's the way. This is the way. He didn't mean that he was the only way to get to God by some creed. He meant the way that he understood the kingdom of heaven is within, the way he teaches that we are one with God. He said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. That is the way, and that is what we teach in unity. So there is one presence, one life, and we are it. It is us. And so Jesus said it this way, Matthew 7, 1 through 3. He says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the same measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? That is wisdom. I do that sometimes. And what Jesus is teaching us here 2,000 years before Carl Jung, Jesus is showing us that we are seeing something out there. Why? Because it's in our own eye. And we're bothered by it out there. Why? Because we don't know it's here. It's here. And the way that we begin to do this work is by stop judging. Don't worry about what your brother is doing. Keep your focus here. When many of you know my principal paths of spirituality have been 12-step recovery and New Thought, which is unity. That there is and both of them are very much about personal responsibility. My sponsor told me this. Remember the serenity prayer? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. She said, here's the wisdom. Put your hand in front of your face. You're free to change everything on the palm side. And nothing on the other side. Oh, that makes it easy, doesn't it? I do the work here. You do the work in your own consciousness, in your own life. And while we're fixated on the problems of our brother and our sister, it keeps us stuck in that same place. These are, in unity, what we would call them are false beliefs. As I said earlier, that we are the wholeness of God personified in a human form. That's who you are. There ain't nothing wrong with you. And I mean that. I'm not just telling you that to make you feel good. There is nothing wrong with you. Do you have opportunities to grow into greater experiences of your wholeness? Uh-huh. Do you have places where you don't fully realize or embody your wholeness yet? Probably. But you are perfect. And you can never do anything to get more perfect. And you can never do anything to be less perfect. You are a child of God. One of my favorite poems, you've heard it a lot if you've been coming to Wednesday Night Live, from Hafiz. You are the sun in drag. Why are you hiding from yourself? Listen to what your friend Hafiz knows for certain. The appearance of this world is a magi's brilliant trick, though its affairs are nothing into nothing. Why bother with mine? You are a divine elephant with amnesia trying to live in an anthole. Sweetheart, oh sweetheart, you are God in drag. We don't know who we are. We don't know what we are. And so, our work, and I talk about this a lot, are you doing your work? We talk about that a lot in spirituality and in unity. Your work is to unlearn who you think you are. And one of the ways you keep yourself stuck is by projection. because the problem is always out there. I'll be okay when he stops doing that. I'll be okay when she starts acting right. I can tell I'm preaching pretty close to the bone now. I guess people are like, Lord, look at the time. I got to be going. We were talking, this came to me the other day, I'll just share it with you. Try this on for size. We teach that heaven and hell are states of mind. Heaven is the state of knowing our oneness. Hell is the state of believing the false stuff. It's the so our work in prayer and in meditation and affirmation is to get the hell out. That's what we're here to do. So you can tell everybody. Reverend Michael Gott told me to get the hell out, so there it is. In the class that I told you, Cindy taught on Sunday, was a really wonderful class, but she talked a little bit about projection too, because we're dealing with the public sphere, things that are going on out in the world, and she said we're all projecting all the time. That's the good news and the bad news is, and you're going to do it until you lay down your body. She said, here's the simple test to see if you're projecting. Are you breathing? And if you are, then yes, you are. So the goal is not to be perfect in that human sense. The goal is to know your perfection in the divine sense and to allow your humanity to be examined. It's the part that we're not willing to examine. See, the shadow is disowned, and you're never going to know all of it, but the idea is to keep it in front of you as much as you can. Cultivate relationships with trust so that they can give you feedback. Reverend Mindy is one of those for me. I told her today, we were talking about this idea of trust and speaking the truth. There's an idea that we have sometimes, we don't want to make waves. So when someone hurts us, I'll just be spiritual, I won't say anything. That's a lack of trust. And what you don't know is by you're not saying something when you're hurt, you're saying, I don't trust you with my pain, and therefore you don't let them wake up a little bit. And even if my pain is caused by my own shadow and my own projection, I got to talk about it. And then Mindy can say, Michael, I think this has to do with that thing we talked about with your dad. That may be what's going on here. I'm like, yeah. And we begin to heal. That's the essence of friendship in spiritual circles. That's the essence of spiritual community. We begin to build these relationships where people can, I was going to say a bad word. I'm not going to do that. Point out our stuff. I'm going to say that. So a couple of things, if you want to know if you're projecting, yes, you're breathing, but maybe more specifically, here's one of the things. When, as I said earlier, that Maria Fran, whatever her name was, said when you get to the end of what is known, you place an archetypal image. That's a nice way to say it. You get to the end of what you know, and you start making stuff up. When you're assigning motive, you see people are doing stuff, don't get me wrong, and they're doing stuff that ain't okay. But when you start assigning motive, that's probably your shadow kicking up. When you start telling the story about why they're doing that, and my sponsor used to tell me that they're not doing it to you, honey, they're just doing it. But it's when we start assigning motive, that's a real indicator that your shadow is up and you're projecting, because you actually don't know why they're doing that. So that's one way. Another way is, do you feel triggered? We use this word a lot, but you know what triggered means? It's when you have an emotional response that you didn't have a chance to check on it, and you didn't know it was coming, and that it's there. That's what being triggered means. It's usually anger or sadness, and it comes and it's instantly there, and you didn't do anything, you didn't know it was going to happen, you're surprised by it. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to act on it, but you're triggered. Something flipped a switch. And it's usually, the switch was installed by your mother. If it's not one thing, it's your mother, or your father, or a grandparent, some early family system. Bruce Lipton says that the first 6 years of a child's life, there are no filters. They're getting a direct download of the false beliefs from their parents and grandparents and back. And so those triggers, those switches are installed in us, and that is okay. It's just to be aware of it. And when you have one of those responses, don't believe what you think it means. Just notice it, be aware with it, and talk to your therapist. Or Mindy, or talk to somebody good. So here are just a couple more practical examples so you kind of get a sense of what we're talking about. Some of you know this quite well, and some of you, this may be a new concept. So I'm going to give you some more practical examples of projection. Victim blaming. It's the victim of someone else's accident or bad luck. They may be offered criticism. And that the theory, that we do this sometimes, that they must have attracted the hostility. They deserved it in some way. That's projection. Another is a projection of relationship guilt. I'm not going to say too much about this, but if you suspect your partner of they're having a wandering eye or something, or maybe they're not as committed to a relationship, check your commitment and check your own eye. Often, when we're suspicious of our partner, it's because something is stirring in us that we're unwilling to look at. Just look at it. That's all I'm asking. Bullying. Bullying is 100% projection all of the time. It is insecurity outward and put in a hostile way. It says that it is to project their own feelings of vulnerability onto targets. Despite the fact that the bully's typically denigrating activities are aimed at the targets, the true source of the negativity is always found in the bully's own sense of insecurity. So if you find yourself bullying, look at yourself, and if you see someone bullying, you know that what's going on is projection. There is a projection of general guilt. How many of you know about free-floating guilt? Just the Catholics, I know. No, just kidding. No, the Pentecostals have it too, let me tell you. And I know some Jewish friends who will say that they're pretty good at the free-floating guilt too. Just, I don't know what I did wrong, but I must have done something wrong. My first memory that I have is I've done something wrong. So it's just free-floating guilt, and I will project that onto others, and I will see guilt where it's not even there. But then it can also be positive. The last example they give is a projection of hope. That sometimes we do have a positive projection, particularly of someone who's helping us. Therapists, I believe that maybe they can help us. You know, actually they can't. You can. But until you're strong enough to hold that hope in your own ability to heal and recover, it's helpful to project that hope onto a teacher or a healer or a sponsor or, you know, whoever that is, a therapist. It's actually that's a healthy example of projection. It won't save you in the end, but it'll get you started. So why do we do this thing called projection? Well, I don't know. But I got some ideas. Some experience of why I think I do it sometimes. And it's that thing. I'm afraid to say I don't know. If I don't know the answers to why things are happening in the world, particularly when I see things happening in the greater world that don't feel right, if I can't figure it out, something in me feels uneasy. The uneasy is actually that's my stuff. So what I'm going to begin to do is project outward and assign blame. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to make it up. Because I've gotten past the level, to the end of everything I know. And it's just so that I don't have to sit in my anxiety of not knowing. Does anybody else get uncomfortable when you don't know what's happening? Do you ever get uncomfortable when you don't know what's next? This is a grown-up talk. So if you're a baby spiritual person, you're welcome to just ignore me for the next little bit. Gene Ladding said this to me in a conversation a month ago, 2 months ago, and it just keeps ringing in my consciousness. If we are going to grow and heal, we must learn to bear discomfort. It's impossible to get to the next stage of your spiritual development without being uncomfortable. I know, that's not the unity message. Life is meant to be great. It's what Howard always says. Why do I have to do these messages? No, he'll tell you it's true too. He'll tell you it's true. If you're going to, well, just think about it this way. You can get in your comfort zone, right? And you know where everything is, and it's good. You're never going to grow beyond that. The only way to grow is to get outside of your comfort zone, and guess how it feels when you get outside your comfort zone? What do you think, Kim? Uncomfortable. And if we can just begin to bear that discomfort, make it welcome, recognize it for what it is. This is growth. This is expansion. This is making myself available to God to use me in a greater way because I don't know the answers, but divine intelligence does, and it is living in me now. And I can trust it. What else am I going to say here? Okay. So we're trying to make sense of the world. We're not comfortable with not knowing. And what I want to say is that in that space that may feel uncomfortable and may feel disorienting, because sometimes it doesn't even feel like you know the directions, that is a space of great availability for God. I had an experience a few years ago where I may have shared some of this, but I had outgrown my comfort zone. I was a music director at a medium-sized church in Dallas. They had found me in the bar. Some of you know the story. I felt the call to ministry at 15 years old. And I was going that path, but I had a secret, right? That I was gay. And there was no place for a gay minister in that world, for sure. So I deferred it, put it away, put it aside, and I started singing piano bars, I started finding show tunes, and I found another thing, and I was like, that's it. The calling came and found me in the gay piano bar. A minister came in and said, we want you to come sing at our church. I'm like, what kind of a church? These New Thought ministers, man, I'm telling you. So it was a gig. It paid $75. I sang 2 songs. My hands were shaking because I hadn't had a drink that day. But it worked. And the thing I noticed is they weren't yelling at me. They weren't telling me how bad I was. So I came back the next week, they paid me again. I began to heal. I began to use these principles that we teach in unity, that God is all there is love. We can begin to act from that reality instead of our false beliefs. I began to do the work and grow and grow. Pretty soon, I'd written songs like "There's Only Love," and I had recorded albums, and I was doing all kinds of stuff out in the world. I was doing all right. And that dang call to ministry came back. It came back like this. My minister in that church, she's like, they had just opened a branch of the seminary in that denomination, the Centers for Spiritual Living. They had opened it in our church, and really, how much simpler could God make it? I'm building a seminary in your backyard. Because my excuse was I couldn't move to go to school because I had a gig, I had work. And she said, so when are you going to start taking these classes? And I was like, bite your tongue. I have a great life. I'm a musician. I don't want to be a minister. And then I was at a conference. I was doing music at a conference in Atlanta, and they had the dean of the school happened to be there, and she was having a Q&A, and me and one other guy were the only ones that came to the Q&A, and I don't know what I was doing there. She said, Michael, what are you doing here? She's like, you're the musician. You're the cool guy. Why do you want to come talk about ministry? And I said, well, I don't know, but I feel like this might be the next indicated step. Click. You know the cosmic click? When you can't unknow what you just found out? Irritating, very irritating. It's like, well, I guess I'm doing ministry school. Well, I resisted it for 2 years. I did it, but I didn't like it. I was uncomfortable the whole time, and I didn't know how the money was going to show up. And then my gig, I was at the mansion on Turtle Creek, had a swanky gig, been there for almost 15 years. I did a duet with Billy Joel one night. It was a fun gig. I met a lot of cool people. They paid me well. It went away. My comfort zone decided to just abandon me. It's like, well, now I clearly can't do ministry school because I need to go travel all the time so I can make enough money to pay my bills. And somebody from my community said, I heard your job went away. I'm committed to you getting through ministry school. I'm going to give you $48,000 so you can finish. A gift. That was God. So, I wasn't planning on telling this story. I need to get to the chase. At the end of ministry school, I was my last 6 months. By that time, I had a realization. I got to do a memorial service. You don't have to be a licensed or an ordained minister to do a memorial service. You do to do weddings. But I had done a memorial service for a friend, and I stood behind that podium. I had been singing in funerals since I was 11, so I had been in many services, but I never stood here. And I stood there, and I talked about my friend's mother, and I read some inspiring material. I did what felt right. And it wasn't about what I did. It was about the mantle of ministry that I stepped into. That there was something that that family needed me to be. And I found it was here. And I stopped resisting. And I recognized that this is, the way it came to me in words was like, I am wired to do ministry. It's what I'm built to do. And I quit resisting. And got through. But then in that last 6 months, there was no place for me to do full-time ministry in the church that loved me and grew me and healed me. There was no place for me there, but my minister wanted me to be there as her music director and a part-time minister. And I knew it wasn't right. I knew that I was supposed to do this work full-time, and I was so uncomfortable with the conversation. There was so much conflict, and it was so hard. And I stepped into the unknown. I actually said I applied for a job that I ended up not getting, but it led to a conversation that did lead to a job in Reno, Nevada. My first ministry, I was an assistant minister there, and I was at a conference in Montana, and I finally met the famous Howard Caesar at the Big Sky Retreat. I'd heard about him for decades, and he was a nice guy. He sat me down, we had lunch, and he said, you should come visit us at Unity of Houston. I've been trying to get a gig here for 20 years. Because I had played at Agape, I'd played at Mile High, the big New Thought churches. I'd done all of them, but I'd never gotten invited to Unity of Houston. Something was working. I get here, and Howard says, how would you like to come work with us? I said, well, I've only been at my church in Reno for a year. I feel like, no. I said no, I did. I turned him down. But then a couple months later, it was actually a conversation. A friend of mine, I told her that I'd gotten this opportunity, and I said no. And she's like, you what? You got an opportunity to work with Howard Caesar in one of the great churches? Okay, no, fine. And I was like, maybe I should rethink this. And I called Howard up. I said, let's talk about this. And less than a year later, I was here. I didn't know that I was to be the next senior minister. But I knew that I was called to work in community. 6 months after I got here, I've never told this story from the platform. I was at the first convention that I went to in Detroit. I was walking back to my hotel room, and I heard a voice, and it said, now is the time to begin the great work of your life. And I knew that I was not only called to ministry, it was like, God, I'm already doing it. It's like, no, you're called to lead a community. And I knew I wanted it to be y'all. But Howard had given me no indicator that that was a possibility. So anyway, to cut to the story, over time we had many conversations, and it led to last Sunday, Howard telling you that he's complete in his work, and I'm to be your leader. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, don't project on me. You will. It's okay. I will step into the role of every minister you've ever worked with, every priest, probably your father, maybe your mother. I will do things and you'll be really irritated at me. And I will make mistakes. Make no mistake. But I'm willing to be corrected. I'm willing to be guided. I'm willing to be forgiven. And I'm willing to do the same for you. It's going to be an amazing journey. But I invite you to really just feel the grief right now. This is 34 years in one pulpit, Howard Caesar. That is unheard of. Nobody has done that. So don't project on Howard either. Anybody feeling a little abandonment? That's not Howard. That's you. That's your projection. But you have to feel it. Find some people to talk to about it. We have to feel the sadness, and then we'll do this together. This was not the talk I planned on giving. But thanks for listening. I love you guys so much. I am ecstatic and a little scared, but we're going to do it together. I love you.